Everyone, let's go ahead and call this meeting to order. Today is Thursday, November 7th. This is the Anchorage Assembly Legislative Committee. We are noticed from 11 a.m. to noon, and great timing, Mr. Clouda walking in. So we're getting started just a little bit late. So again, we're noticed to noon, and let's go ahead and do roll call and then, or introductions, and then we will move into our agenda.
Cameron Perez-Verdio.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Myers.
Anna Brawley. And on the phone, we have any members on the
Heather
phone?
Briggs.
All right, thanks, Heather.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Yes, thank you. That's Wendy and Heather, our state lobbyists. And I don't see any other members on the phone, but I will notice them or mention them when they arrive. We are also joined in the room by our legislative services staff, Mr. Clouda from the mayor's office, policy director, clerk's office, and right now, no members of the public. So let's go ahead and move forward. We'll only briefly cover under unfinished business if there's any updates there. So we have federal, state, and then our district and member priorities. And we were joined by Mr. Solt. Can you hear us, Mr. Solt? Okay, well, he must be on mute. So just a brief update there, and then our main purpose today is to review the draft legislative program, which you all have in front of you and is posted online. As far as unfinished business and state and federal updates, of course, Tuesday was a major election. The purpose of this committee is not to discuss that in detail, but I will note that we heard one relevant announcement to the state yesterday or last night, which was that the Alaska House and Senate have announced the intention to have bipartisan coalitions, and then the numbers and the details of that are remaining to be seen. And I'll just very briefly turn over to our lobbyists, Wendy or Heather, if you have comments on that, just knowing that it's preliminary at this point.
Thank you, Member Browley. Yes, the House and Senate organized a bipartisan coalition. The Senate is very similar to what you saw last year. Senator Gary Stevens, Senate President, Finance Co-Chairs Bert Stedman, Lyman Hoffman, and Donnie Olson. So I think that's gonna, you'll see some Anchorage, probably Kelly Merrick and one or two Anchorage members get on there. You know, our Anchorage legislators are in the majority, so that is good. Let's move over to the House real quickly. Going to see Bryce Edgman, Louise Stutz, and then going to finance, you're going to see Neil Foster, who's had it for years. I understand the rumor is Anchorage might get that other co-chair with Andy Josephson. Now, I can't confirm that yet, and Heather, unless you've heard it confirmed, but that's what we're hearing right now, which would be fantastic for us.
Yeah, I have not heard anything on that front. I just would note for the committee, Madam Chair, that there are still a number of outstanding ballots to be counted. The last estimate I heard was upwards of 40,000. Whether or not all of those absentee ballots will materialize, we'll see. But there are still a number outstanding, and we should see an update to those counts tomorrow to fill out the early voting and those absentees that they have in hand.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or thoughts from members? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Of course, folks on the phone, please text me if you want to get in the queue or speak up if I am missing your text. And I'll just briefly note, you know, there's, as Ms. Brake said, there's a lot of ballots to be counted, and really organization takes time. There's committee chairs, there's membership, all of those things. So I think all of that is, you know, we'll wait and see what happens. But I think just to note that it is relevant to the work of the municipality and this committee, because we are looking at basically what we are going to ask them to do in the coming session on behalf of Anchorage and their constituents and ours. So I think also then that pivots over to the legislative program. So of course, we develop and pass our program well before session starts. And then really, we see how things play out over the course of session and where we see it most strategic to be advocating and what's possible. So just to note that as we look through the program, and that'll be our major item for today, that we should think about really communicating what Anchorage needs, being strategic in how we do that, but also knowing that a lot of the really nitty gritty as far as what we advocate for and how is really to come. So this document is intended to really communicate what we see we need for Anchorage, but that's not the end of the story. So with that, I'm going to move us on to our new business item, our primary topic for today, which is the legislative program draft. And I will mainly turn this over to Mr. Clauda from the mayor's office, who has been a great partner in this process and really has taken the lead on a lot of chasing down a lot of these things and making some calls. So what I'd like to do is really have him walk through kind of updates and what are the big choices in this document. And then if we can, I'd like to go kind of one big chunk at a time to capture feedback. And then at the end, we'll kind of talk about timing and next steps. But really the goal is to, if you have comments or you want to discuss any item in here, this is what today is for. And then I will also note, I guess I'll just say briefly on timing before we go there, the intent or the requirement in code is to introduce this before the budget is passed. So the budget's been introduced, but we have to introduce this before it passed. However, as discussed yesterday, there was a request for a work session to review the program and just making sure that we get this right. So the intent is to introduce it on the 19th, postpone it to the meeting of December 3rd, and then take a vote on December 3rd. So this is not the last opportunity to provide comments, but we also need to move to the posture of having this in a fully formatted version. And so just keep in mind that if you would like to make changes, it does impact staff time as well. So that's why we're trying to move this discussion forward now. So with all of that, and I'll reiterate the timing again at the end, I'm going to turn it to Mr. Clauda. So go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair Brawley. So the program that you've got in front of you, this is a near final draft with the caveat that we still have a brief window to incorporate feedback from this group, as well as we're also looking carefully at kind of the results of this week's elections and how what strategies come into play with how we position some of our priorities and some of our asks. So I think there are a few little loose ends or a few things that could change a little bit depending on those factors, but otherwise you have a very close to being complete draft in front of you. So I want to, so I'll start off drawing attention that our plan for the design of this is that, we obviously have a lot of, it's a fairly long program as far as the total number of asks broken into several different categories, but we did want to pull out a top 3 list of our top 3 priorities for the legislative session. And so those 3 are on that first page at the very top. Adequately funding snow removal on the state roads. So we see this as a very important priority. We have worked with our departments that are responsible for transportation with snow removal, like M&O, and learned a bit about how when it comes to the state side of things, a lot of the issue there is staffing for state capacity, but also anything we can do to increase their capacity and turnaround times on plowing is something a very, very high priority for us. Second are the state reforms to implement crisis behavioral health services. This is taken a lot of inspiration from the Crisis Now legislative program, and each of these are reiterated within the document too, and with a little bit more detail behind them. Third is raising the base student allocation and stabilizing funding for public schools. So we stand, united with the school district and with school districts around the state, really, in that as a major priority for us. So those are our top 3. And actually, and we could, if you'd like, maybe I could pause there and take any comments, because this is going to be, it's good to recognize that the way things work in the world, right, that some people won't go much past that first page. So any feedback or comments on those top 3?
Ms. Branca?
I just wanted to comment on something I heard in the meeting earlier, that Chair Constant was looking at possibly putting signs saying this is a state corridor. I think identifying whose road is whose, making it really visible is a good first step, but maybe those signs should also say, watch for pedestrians or, not just be, this is a state road, but make them also have a safety message or something. But that I'm sure is not part of this.
Sure. Well, through the chair, those are all really important comments, Member Braga. I think safety is something that's also reflected in this to a significant degree and we'll can talk about in a moment. But also, yeah, the road jurisdiction issue I think is always an important one for us to communicate, but one that's always going to be a little bit sticky in the public minds about very hard. It's hard for even me to always keep track of what's a state road and what's a muni road, and I think for the general public who doesn't really put a lot of effort into road jurisdiction, I think it's something that's always complicated. But it is something that we're all sort of in this together when it comes to snow removal. And if the state doesn't do a good job, then we get blamed for that.
Mr. Perez-Fridia.
Thanks, and thanks for putting this together. This is great. I'm thinking about alignment with Mayor's priorities, one, and thinking about language, about her focus around safety, for instance, and you had mentioned that. And thinking about the second one in terms of state reforms to implement crisis behavioral health systems, and how to characterize that, whether that is a safety, whether that is a public safety issue, or whether that is a mental health issue, or whether that, like, how to frame that in a way that makes it more powerful in terms of an ask. And so that was in my mind of the often behavioral health crisis, often from our perspective is framed from a public safety perspective and a public health perspective. So anyway, so just wanted to share that in terms of maybe how it's titled, and thinking about maybe that public safety is top on everyone's mind right now, and maybe that's one way of making that more punch more. And then the other question was just the relationship between us and the school district and their plan for a legislative ask and program, and how this aligns to that. Particularly with the BSA, I'm assuming that's going to be their priority. But just in terms of has that conversation happened, and is their plan to align to this as well?
Yes, through the chair. So the public safety comment, I'll have more to say about that in a moment in the document, because I think that is a consideration: behavioral health and public safety, and what the connection is. They're not identical issues, of course, but there's a connection, right? Regarding the BSA and coordination with the school district, yes, there is a good amount of coordination with the school district. Their top ask, of course, is the base student allocation. They have some other asks in there as well. Related to transportation, and I think and bond debt reimbursement too. But I think that we're completely lockstep with them on their highest priority of that base student allocation.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just briefly add, we can get into more detail. I think in terms of the nexus of public safety and public health, I appreciate that flag. And I know during the last session, there was an extensive discussion about homelessness. And one of the arguments that us and other local governments have been making, and again, recognizing those are two separate items as well, is really that to the extent that we don't have other crisis services or really other community-based services in place, or not enough of them, that all of the burden then falls to our first responders, in the way that all medical emergencies fall to the emergency room, even if it's not an emergency per se, but that's where people access. And so saying that that we need to make state investments in these other areas, because the result is it really hurts our budget and it hurts our workforce being able to take on that burden. So that's the general logic, but we can get into more detail. Any other questions on these top three? Oh, Ms. Venna-Clausen.
And if I could just add one thing about the alignment with the school district, Assembly members Brawley and Rivera are working with school board members to do a joint resolution from the Assembly and the school board. They'll be very similar in ask to last year. So that'll be forward in a few weeks, I think, too. Did I say Brawley? Yeah. I meant Bronga. Yeah.
Okay, so then why don't we turn going to page 3, and then each of the 3 priorities has some more depth here, and then we can get into the other priorities in this document as well. So, Mr. Cloud.
Sure. So then the rest of the document, or most of the rest of the document, then is broken into. It's actually now 6 different kind of buckets. Improving road safety, snow removal, strengthening behavioral health, first responder nexus, securing our energy future, support education and workforce development, increase housing supply and address affordability, and promote good government. So it was five previously. We broke out the education one separately and added in some language about the university, but I'll kind of go through those one at a time. I just wanted to give you the big picture of it. So the first one for improving road safety and snow removal. That one, of course, reiterating our snow removal concern, number one as a top bullet point there. And then the next two are about safety. So the establishing road corridors one was in the last program, last year's program, and then moved into the draft in this one. I did meet, I have met with our staff at the Muni that project management and engineering and public works and traffic and AMATs and they did mention our transportation folks do believe that road safety corridors are not necessarily the most effective way of achieving pedestrian, or road traffic safety in general, especially, with regard to pedestrians and others. But that they believe they're putting their effort is more invested in the Vision Zero action plan, which is a framework to eliminate, traffic fatalities and severe injuries. And so this is one that I would put out to the body if we want to keep the road safety corridors one or not. But not calling into question the priority of safety, but more so about what our experts in transportation within the municipality think is the most effective action strategy, is more so about the Vision Zero action plan, which and the ask of the state there, it's something that's partnered between the municipality and state DOT, and state DOT is understaffed as far as being able to actually implement it. But our folks, feel that that identifying the areas that have the highest hazards, that we already feel like we know that, and so that it's not something we feel like we need to study necessarily. It's more something that we need to implement the action plan for strategies that we believe will be effective. So that is a pivot. If people feel really strongly about keeping the road safety corridor language in there, I think that's something that we can do. But I would say that within the administration, our view is much more that Vision Zero is the key pathway for achieving that end. And that also affects the staffing, also affects the pavement preservation, the basic ongoing road maintenance that's needed too. That's largely a staffing function within DOT is the understanding that's been conveyed to me. Then we also have here a couple of other transportation related ones, the ability to bond for capital projects within state park units. This is related to Chugach State Park access, to be able to have that, to provide that access on state land. So that's something that came up. And then wildfire safety, Anchorage Fire Department Chief Schrage provided a lot of detail that I've kind of distilled here, but is about adding fuel breaks around egress routes and connections to accessible areas for wildfire management. Most of his concerns relate to egress routes and the fuel breaks along them, so that's why it's lumped in with transportation. It might be an awkward fit, but it seemed to go best there. If I keep rolling, the strengthening.
Sorry, just very briefly, I'll note two things on this transportation one, and then we can move on unless others have comments. The road safety corridors, to my understanding, that's something that Member Zalatel has really championed, but I think it's been put in the program for the last couple of years, and so I think it was in the spirit of what you said, which is improving pedestrian safety. So just a flag, I would follow up with her directly on that, but I understand the logic of that, so I'm hoping that we can get that alignment. And then on the wildfire safety, tomorrow you all will see an amendment from myself, Mr. Johnson, and Ms. Bronga that basically adds this wildfire safety project to the capital improvement budget as a state ask. And so we can talk about it more later, but that's connecting up with there. So before we move on, is there any other comments or questions on transportation? Okay, then let's keep going. Thanks.
Thank you. So the next area is strengthening behavioral health and the first responder nexus. And again, behavioral health and public safety don't want to say that they're the same issue exactly, but I think that there is, of course, an important overlap, and so that's why we try to reference them as a nexus to Mr. Perez-Verdia's comment. So the key thing here, supporting the Crisis Now legislative priorities. There's sort of a package of reforms here that would allow for the implementation. Crisis Now is kind of a statewide movement that includes many providers that are trying to establish fully this kind of crisis behavioral health services. And a lot of times, behavioral health crises get dealt with through a police response or a fire response that's not the best or appropriate response for the situation. And so there's several reforms there that are designed to improve that situation. Also, inflation adjusting the E911 surcharge too, which is something that's been capped in state statute and hasn't kept up with inflation. So revenue mechanism. Next one up is securing our energy future. So several of these are, this is, with thinking about for the mayor, high priority of doing what we can, with regard to the gas shortage that's coming out of Cook Inlet. What can we do? And a lot of it is raising our voice of advocacy, as well as things we can do within the municipality, but those are not in our legislative program. Funding the rail belt transmission upgrades, which have some federal money associated with them and need a state match. Expanding hydroelectric power generation takes more of the onus off of natural gas. Funding weatherization, energy efficiency, and electrification programs through state agencies. And then also some amount of of a viable, well analyzed, incentive for increasing natural gas production in Cook Inlet. So that anything that could be done to encourage more natural gas production, help bridge the current situation, something we would be supportive of. And I can pause or I can keep going.
Yeah, Ms. Braga has a question.
I'm sorry, what is 988 telecommunications fee? Enacting 988 telecommunications fee?
Yes, through the chair, Member Braga. That is so I'm not the most knowledgeable about the details of this, but 988 is sort of along the same on the 911 model as an emergency dispatch line to access behavioral health services, crisis behavioral health services. And there is a surcharge, on your phone bill for a 911 surcharge, right? And this would be a surcharge for 988 services. And that creates a revenue mechanism for the crisis behavioral health providers. So it's one of the key things to get those services fully stood up.
And I can add a little more color. So 988, I don't remember what year it was implemented, but that is it's a national suicide crisis line. So it's operating in every state. And my understanding is the long-term requirement is that states have a revenue mechanism to pay for it as well. So I don't know exactly how we're paying for it now, but it's related to that. And many other states have taken similar action. And then to add to what Mr. Claudia said. So it's something that already exists. It's already in place. It's related to our care line, I believe, at the state level, but it needs funding. So, and also just while we're on that topic and in general, I think the way to read this is not necessarily that this suite of things is all of the muni priorities, right? That it's, because there's a lot of other things, but really trying to laser focus on what we can ask the legislature to do and the governor to do at the state level. So that's why these things are so specific in a lot of areas. Yeah, I don't see any other questions, so please continue.
Thank you. Then next up, education and workforce development. So this has just two areas to it. One is increasing the base student allocation. So that's both increasing it and adjusting in statute for inflation in the future, inflation proofing essentially. So which are part of what the school district has asked for. So the idea there, I think a lot in the past, the base student allocation has just been sort of adjusted in statute periodically and then revisited at kind of as needed every few years or whatever. But I think this creates a mechanism where it automatically increases in line as costs go up. And then funding the University of Alaska system. And even though I'm a former University of Alaska employee, this wasn't one that I put in there. The mayor saw this as an important asset for the Muni, being University of Alaska Anchorage and the system as a whole. Then next, increasing housing supply and addressing affordability. So increasing resources available to improve housing affordability statewide through AHFC and Alaska Mental Health Trust programs like the special needs housing grant and other programs that AHFC has that do address homelessness and affordability and supportive housing. So I think that there are programs that exist, that could be funded and would provide a lot more resources, I think, for housing needs statewide, especially for vulnerable populations. We also have a line in here about increasing funding available to build infrastructure that supports new housing development, and that's through DOT and also through AHFC also has the supplemental housing program that can help to finance infrastructure for affordable housing developments, especially those that are HUD funded. And so that's another one that can help to create more resources to make more housing happen. Statutory changes, and by the way, you probably noticed in here we tried to break out budget requests and statutory changes for each of these categories. So the developing new mechanisms through ADA and AHFC to provide gap financing and patient capital for housing development. So this is something Senator Dunbar has actually pre-filed a bill, and he sponsored a bill in the last session to this effect that would allow the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority to make loans for multifamily development. It would be a longer term, more beneficial for developers. And then allowing governments to tax and to designate and tax dilapidated properties at a higher mill rate. And that was also something in the last session that had some traction, had some support behind it, but didn't pass in the end. So those are some of the housing priorities.
So before we move on, I want to note too, and I'm going to propose we delete the word homelessness out of here, not because it is not important, but I think what we talked about is it can be hard to tell the story of how housing and homelessness are connected. And I think also what we've heard, and I know Wendy has mentioned this many times as well, legislators are really interested in workforce housing and really that focus on housing. So I think we all understand that it addresses multiple issues, right? It addresses economic issues, homelessness, all of these other pieces. But I think, again, in the spirit of being very focused on what we're asking for, I think, and also just to note, there is no homelessness ask in this budget. We received $4 million for shelter funding, which is great. We have thanked the legislature profusely for that. But I think the not so silent understanding was that we would not come back with another ask like that this year. And so that's why you don't see it in here. It doesn't mean it isn't important. But again, we are really trying to focus on what we need to do and what the state can really do to increase housing production. So that was the logic there. But of course, that is open for discussion as well. Mr. Presredia.
Thanks. That's yeah, I just want to explore that a little bit. Because I think you're right. Both it avoids the confusion. So that this is really about workforce housing, which I think is a powerful sort of ask, and I think that's something that's going to resonate well. I also think that that's often the number one thing I'm hearing from legislators that they're most concerned about is homelessness, because that's what they're hearing from their constituents, is that that's the issue that they're most concerned about. And so I just also wonder whether this can be seen as one of many sort of things we're doing to address homelessness. So that's what I'm trying to figure out is it both not an additional ask for homelessness, but that by investing in workforce housing, you are investing in part of a solution to homelessness. So that may just be a nuance in terms of how it's presented, but in terms of my conversations with legislators, it's often the number one topic is what are you doing about homelessness and what are you gonna do about it and that sort of thing. So I just wonder in terms of whether that's in here or whether that's just part of the verbal conversation that happens, but between us and them. So, but would love to hear your thoughts on that, whether you see that as being a strength or a weakness.
Yes, through the chair, I think that we, there's definitely some strategy that goes into how we position this and what we ask for here. I think that I think I'd be interested in hearing, from Ms. Breaks and Ms. Chamberlain about the way to position homelessness too. I think that with the with two bipartisan coalitions that might be there might be some more receptiveness to putting in a more explicit homelessness ask. I do think that there are a lot of upstream housing types of investments that do help address the issue of homelessness, but that aren't always seen as specific to homelessness.
I mean, do you think that the workforce housing that we have now is called workforce housing, but it is also sort of in some ways rapid rehousing. It is a way to get somebody from the street into stable housing. And yes, we are trying to get them to have a job. They have responsibility in terms of a lease, that sort of thing. But it's also used as the next step right after homelessness. So that's what I'm wondering is that when we say workforce housing, I think there's a broad definition of what that means. And I think in some cases it is a very direct sort of targeted approach to solving homelessness. So that's all I'm trying to say is that I think that it's in some cases not that distant sort of upstream thing. It's really a very targeted approach. So anyway.
Yeah, Ms. Bronga, and then I do want to also get the comments from Wendy and Heather, but Ms. Bronga, go ahead.
I'm back on page 4 at the bottom when you're fund the University of Alaska system to enable the continuation of all academic voc tech programs. Maybe that language fits, but I would like to see the reinstatement of the education program. Some of the programs that have been skinny down or eliminated that are causing shortfalls in our labor force, specifically teachers. So social workers, I think we've done some work on that one, but thanks.
Sure. Through the chair to Member Bronga, I think those are very good points. I think the university system has years of budget cuts and also flat funding that is really a cut. So I think that we put in here more of a broad statement of support for the university. I think about maintaining and not there's been a posture of eliminating academic programs. I think and we like to see more of a continuation for the university to be a strong force. But I think we could explore other language as well.
So maybe continuation and reinstatement of critical programs to, I don't know the next word, but reinstatement of critical programs to the functioning of Anchorage. And
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a good suggestion. And I know our staff are taking notes about changes to make. So thanks everybody for participating. So Wendy and Heather, if you're still on the line, I would love to get your thoughts on this, well, on any of these that we've covered so far, but really this housing piece. What do you think is going to be an effective strategy for Anchorage?
I'll go, Heather. I think workforce housing is a good first step. And the reason that I say that is we have to be able to keep it in the budget from the governor's veto. So that's number one. Number two is a lot of communities will come in for homeless or affordable housing. And it seems to be that AFHC and the state is definitely looking at workforce housing. To go along with that, you've got DOT, all of these state agencies wanting housing too. So I think start with workforce housing, and as was said earlier, it does allow for housing, as you move up from homelessness into step 1 housing into step 2, and then get workforce housing. I think it's a better fit for the legislature, especially for Anchorage legislators to justify it, because you're sitting there with Juneau, you're sitting with Fairbanks, you're sitting there with rural legislators tight on housing. So it'll be a capital request. Having said that, let me just say that right now, I don't know, given oil prices, there'll be a huge spend on capital. But if we can work something out with AFHC, they did give out workforce housing money to some rural communities. If we can work something out with a mix for them, I think that's the opportunity. That's the sweet spot.
Yeah, thank you. Those are good thoughts. Was Heather, were you going to speak as well?
No, I just wanted to make sure I didn't have anything to add. So
Oh, okay. Thank you. The other thing I'll note under this section that's different than the last year's program is last year's program included an ask supporting funding toward the Housing Alaskans Public-Private Partnership, the State Housing Trust. And of course, that money was in the budget and then it was vetoed. And so I know that organization is looking at their own strategy. We have met with them, myself, Ms. Fenna Clausen and Graham Downey from Mayor's office. And what we discussed is really kind of there's other avenues besides the program, because we're trying to keep it short, we can pass resolutions of support. We can speak in support of their work. Of course, they work statewide, but that benefits Anchorage as well. So just to say as well, there are going to be situations where we may not put something in the program, or it may not be have a close nexus to the municipality itself. But we can always explore. And I know, Member Braga, you did this with a resolution, was bringing saying we support action. So that's just something to keep in mind if there's a specific program or organization or effort that doesn't fit in here, but we can still take action on it. So any other comments on this housing piece? Okay, let's move on then.
And then next up is the promote good government. And so admittedly a little bit of a catch-all category in a lot of ways, but all things that relate to, provision of basic government services. So this includes the funding. This is going to be a perennial issue for local governments around the state, but funding the community assistance program, making a full contribution, as well as recapitalizing the community assistance fund that funding comes from. It's easier, it's more of a stable force, for our communities if that fund is fully, recapitalized. So then restoring defined benefit pensions for public employees. This is something I saw that in the House Coalition announcement that they mentioned retirement reform for public employees as one of their priorities as a coalition. So that ask might be well positioned. And then the other one on this, and this came from via, I think, the clerk, about an election reform bill and about concerns about voter registration. So some language about that is included. It relates to when voter registration rolls are allowed to be kind of updated after a period of non-response from individuals, or when they move out of state and register somewhere else.
Yeah, and on that election one, I think it's, I think we remember there's been multiple bills that have gone through multiple sessions. None of them have gotten over the finish line. But Anchorage has consistently, or the municipality has consistently offered some recommendations there that would benefit us as well. And I don't know if Clerk Hines is on the line or going to come. Okay, I'm seeing no from Jasmine, but just to note, we were working closely with the clerk's office to make sure that this language was consistent with what we've asked in the past and targeted.
And then the last two bullets under good government, refrain from expanding mandatory property tax exemptions, which would reduce our property tax base. So that's probably also a kind of a perennial one. I think that AML and I think and our lobbyists have, who also represent AML, have done a great job of keeping this one in check, but it is an ongoing concern. I think a lot of influential legislators would like to expand the senior exemption, and it would not be a great thing for our tax base. And then the last item here is about allowing senior and residential exemptions to be claimed for individual units of a cooperative property. So a little bit on this, I had the concern about this one. If we raise the issue of exemptions in a bill, then are we opening it up to more tinkering with mandatory exemptions? And this one is actually not a Title 29 change in state statute. It is under it's under a different section of law, Title 34, I believe is what it is. So it may not, it doesn't raise that level of concern, at least we think. And then the final piece here is a very high level update on the port modernization project. I think in the program, this will go well with a nice graphic piece that demonstrates the progress. A key thing we want to message here, we're not, in bold here, and a lot of this language is borrowed from the program from last year, but with a few updates in it. But our primary ask is that, continue to find avenues to promote and educate your constituents and colleagues about the importance of the project for Alaska's economic future. And so then we have a few facts about the port. And one thing, I think one piece of messaging that we want to encourage is kind of in bullet point 3, we might be able to sharpen this a little bit, is that we do have the ability to, there's a plan of finance for the port that allows us to fund the improvements with revenue bonds and with surcharges. But that doesn't entail surcharges that get passed on to consumers, not just in Anchorage, but around the state, on consumer goods and on petroleum and on concrete. And so The message that we can communicate there is that yes, we do have the ability to finance this and do this, but it comes at a cost to people around the state of Alaska. And so additional benefit, in the form of grants or support from state and federal sources reduce that burden, significantly. So that's one key aspect of our messaging, and then also being proactive in the event of like a disaster or a challenge that impairs the port. We want the right kind of information to be out there as far as like why the port is important to the state as a whole.
Thanks. And I'll add a couple other comments and then would like folks' reaction to this as well. So the other thing you will not see in here is one is a monetary ask, and that was true last year. Last year, our message was thank you for funding and not taking away the funding to the port. But of course, a lot of what we've been talking about, what Mr. Cloud just said, is a combination of bonds, pursuing federal grants and loans, right? So we're not making a direct ask to the state. So I just want to note that. And the other thing I want to note that's not in here, but we are continuing to watch is the potential for another proposal for a port authority. So I know that was out there last year. We discussed not really taking a position on that or proactively addressing it on paper in this program, but to monitor it and to raise questions and concerns that I know we all have about that proposal. So just to note, those things are not in there. And then again, I want to turn to our lobbyists, unless I'm not seeing any comments at the moment, to get feedback on this piece, because it is a significant shift in terms of not listing this as a priority. And I know there's also been discussion potentially of a general obligation bond. And I know all of this is speculative right now. But anyway, all that to say, just Wendy and Heather, if you have thoughts on this one as well.
I agree. I think this is a good move. Top three, you're right. The top three is what they will look at, and then those that want to will go through the book. If the port's the top one, it's sort of overwhelming, particularly that we're not asking for money. So I think to have it down there is great, but not, to reference it, but not have it as one of the top priorities or a big priority, because we're not asking for money. So we need to focus on the areas we are asking them money for. I think most of all, what we can do is give them an update for reassurance that we're moving ahead, we're doing well, and we are seeing movement, we are seeing progress being at the port. So just keeping them updated, I think, is the best we can do.
Yeah, this is Heather. I agree with that, and I think this will be appreciated. Leaving it out, that's going to beg the question, but addressing it in the program, I think, really helps answer those questions, and knowing that it's still there, it's moving forward, and we're not coming back to ask for money right now, and hope not to have to, but giving this update, I think, will be really helpful.
Okay, and I'm not seeing other comments or questions right now, so we can move on.
The last piece of the program is the district level asks, and so I think member or Chair Brawley, I think you coordinated these with all of the members for each district. So these were taken from the capital improvement plan for the municipality, I think, and members defined which projects to put in there.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think, so, and again, thanks to Ms. Van Clausen for coordinating that as well, reaching out to everybody. And so just to be clear, myself and Nolan and our team did not make changes to this. It's really deferring to each of the district's two members on what those look like. And then, so I don't know if folks who are here have any comments or want to flag anything here. There's an opportunity, but I think, it's really what you guys want to put in here. Mr. Littlefield?
Just a quick question. Looking at all these projects, do we have a dollar figure attached to this somewhere? Because I know Scott and I know what dollar figures are on ours, and she referred to the top three. If you grabbed all three of them and they actually go to the state, we actually got them, it'd be a lot of money, but I don't know where the rest of these lie. So I don't know if we can attach them. I don't know if we want to publicize that or we just want to have it for our own use.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I can take a stab at answering. One is that, we've asked that with some exceptions, with anything you put in here, it should be in the capital improvement budget for 2025. And I know through the budget process, we'll look at that state column because that's where all those numbers are. So my understanding is, unless someone made something up out of nowhere with these, they are attached to a project that either exists or needs to get put in the program. But I think that's a good question. Should we put the dollar amounts here? Because you're right that, adding all of these up, we're not going to get all of these. And some of them are bigger than others. Nolan or Steph, I don't know if you have an answer, or I guess kind of, do we want to put dollar amounts next to these is the question.
I'd like to see what Wendy and Heather think, but I think it could be a good idea because some of these might only be 100,000 and some might be 2 million. And if it's down to the wire when they're putting the capital budget together, there might be a deal where someone gets, you get 500,000 for your district and they have to quickly pick projects. But I'd defer to Wendy and Heather.
I think that the district ones, the smaller ones, the top three are going to be rather difficult because, fully funding education, the crisis now of behavioral health, they're going to be big ticket items. And so I think, but I do think the other ones in the book, the capital construction projects, the dollar amount's good. I agree with you there, Claire, that as they move forward, they look for, okay, my budget, I've been given 2 million, I've been given 4 million or 6 million, and they look for the projects then that fit into that dollar amount.
Okay.
Whether we have time to pull them all together and put them in this document is another question.
Clausen?
I think also some of them are multi-year projects, so we may be asking them to fund a portion and not all of it. And I also think there are some projects on here that might not be in the CIB, so it might be difficult to determine how much those are going to cost. But that's not to say we couldn't put in the ones that we do know, just might not be comprehensive.
Although if we don't know, we shouldn't be asking. They're not ready for an ask yet if we don't know how much we're asking.
Yeah, Ms. Branca?
Well, I do know that on the District 5 list, there's 2 that don't have any dollar amount, but the number 6 where it's these missing connections to trails on that side of town. I don't think there's any dollar amount for that. So, we could work to get that, but it would be. And then the fire egress on the military boundary, I guess, there's different pots of money that are helping to find fire egress routes. So it would be dependent on how much they wanted to do. Do they want to do from Basher down to Chugach Foothills? That's one ask. And then if they wanted to continue down northeast. So I think ours would be a little bit difficult.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, go ahead. Whoever's on the phone.
Hi, this is Heather. I guess I would just also mention here that because these will be, some of these are going to have to be entered into CAPSIS, there's going to need to be a dollar amount associated with them for them to get into the budget system for the legislature.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just a reminder too, the reason our budget process and this are connected is because, they don't need to be amended by the time we pass this, but is that the things that go into CAPSIS are directly from the 2025 state column of the CIB. So that's why we're encouraging folks to look at that. But again, this will basically get passed before all of that other piece needs to be finalized, because we're working through our budget, but there's multiple components, and then there's still time by January to work on what goes in the bonds. So just to say, I guess the ask then would be to members to go back and look at this. If there is specific dollar amounts to attach to that, we will list them. But I'll use one example with the West Anchorage ones. Number 1 that we've listed is something that wouldn't go into CAPSIS and probably wouldn't even be state funding, but the choice that we've made is to highlight this as a priority so that we can talk about it. So knowing that we're not going to get any funding for that, but it is a priority, that is another way to look at this list. But to the extent that you want something that is a line in the budget that gets money, those are the ones that need to be in CAPSIS so that they can act on them. So maybe that's a follow-up ask for our staff, is to send out a note and just say, hey, one more time, well, look at the program as a whole, but also look at your district priorities. And if you can provide a dollar amount and confirm that it's in the CIB, or that you intend to put it there, that we should try to update that. But knowing that there's some of these may not have a dollar amount with them. Okay, any other comments on the program as a whole? And I see we only have a few minutes left. Ms. Ross.
I'm a broken record. This has happened every year, so no fault to everyone involved. But I just feel like this is too long. Not only are we competing for space to get this in 8 pages, but we're competing for who's advocating for what. I'm not the decision maker on this, but I think everyone should think really hard about whether these all should be in there, and if we need to narrow it down further.
Yeah. Okay, any other comments from members? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Presvidia.
Yeah, no, I appreciate those comments, and I think that the one thing I'm wanting to just understand again, I loved the fact that in the beginning you said, well, they may not get past the first page, right? And so is it the intention that the first 3 are categories? Or are they, I'm trying to understand the relationship between the first 3 and all of the others in the back. And if the first 3 are like, here are the umbrellas that we're trying to do, or what we've done is we've said, there's a whole bunch in the back that are really important to us. We want you to go through these, but here are our top 3 most important asks. And if so, are they specific enough in the front to be able to be like, okay, so if this is my executive summary, do I have enough information just in this front page? And then the last question is, if those are your 3, can I quickly flip to more information about those so that I can go, okay, that's what I want. So that's the only thing that I think is a bit of the power of the executive summary, or of that like quick look, would be, so maybe, I know there's a whole bunch of questions in there, but like, are these 3 priorities to be funded? Are these very specific? Are they specific enough in here? And are there more information in the back in order to understand them more?
Yes, through the chair to Member Perez Verdia. So I think each of those 3 is echoed in the broader document. So it's kind of like there's a whole list of things that we like that's laid out in the document, and then we pulled 3 to be the top 3 that we thought were the most important, to put the extra emphasis on it, so that our kind of prioritization doesn't get lost in the shuffle. I think as far as making sure that that the connection is apparent between, the top 3 that appear here, and then they appear later, with slightly different wording and a little bit more detail later in the document. I think we talked about how we could maybe flag those in a graphical way, like maybe they have like a, certain mark next to them that makes them like, this is a top priority kind of a thing. And so I think Ms. Hartman had some ideas about how to implement that.
Cool, that's great. Yeah, I mean, even saying top 3, or so, whatever that is. So thanks. Yeah, I think that's my only feedback, is that tracking from the front to the back and how it works. So thanks.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other further comments, and I know we're just at our time now. I don't see any members of the public. Is there anyone on the phone other than okay? So I don't think we have anyone for audience participation. So again, I will just reiterate, this will be introduced on the agenda for the 19th. There is still opportunity to provide feedback. Anybody watching this recording, please also provide your feedback, and provide it directly to Ms. Van Clausen and Mr. Clauda. We will also still have an opportunity to have a work session on this before we anticipate a vote on December 3rd. So we will ask folks to send your feedback in writing. And with that, I think there's no other business, so we will be adjourned.